LT1000s like this one have got to be one of my most favorite mowers to flip. They just plain don't get any simpler than these. But with that simplicity, they also come with a deck that does not like to sit. And so if you end up with one of these that has been sitting more than a couple of years, 99.5% of the time, the deck is not going to work. So today, we're going to do a video on going through and figuring out why your Craftsman LT deck will not engage. We're going to cover everything from simplistic to rip it apart and put it back together and stuff it back under the machine. Let's get started. Stage 1. Is the cable actually connected or doing anything? I've seen it quite often where these will get hammered up as somebody's last straw and they will break the connection that's on the inside of here, and vice versa. They will also break this connection here where it connects to that spring. Now what you can't see is on the top of the pulley behind here, let's see if I can bring this around. On the top of this pulley is where it's connected. Now if I reach up and I go to move the lever, you'll see the spring tighten up, and that pulley should come back at us right now. And see how it's not? That's because that pivot is frozen. And that right there is your number one reason why it is your LT1000 deck will not engage. Where do we go from here? From here, we're going to drop this deck. Now, one thing that is a pain about these LTs is that the deck does not like to slide out from underneath the Craftsman tractor. You pretty much have got to find a way to jack up that front end at least a good solid 6 inches. In my case, I cheat and I use a winch and I jack the whole thing up to where it's easier for you guys to see. But before you even start on this, figure out how you're going to get that front end up on something. If you use the cinder block method, like I see a lot of you do, make sure to put some tire chucks behind this so you don't run yourself over. Now those of you who are quite eagle-eyed, you might have noticed that this thing is currently doing the Chevy in the front. And I'll take 5 seconds to show you why that is. It's a really easy fix on these LTs. Now I'm really not going up that high. You could easily do this on cinder blocks at home. I raise it a little further because it lets me get the camera there for you. But why is this currently doing the Chevy? So let me come over here. As you can see, those are kicked way out. So what happens is, this one here, the only thing connecting it across is the tie rod in the back. So if we look at that tie rod, it should be running level across here. As you can see, it is all the way up to the point it is hitting the frame. You can see a mark in the frame. That tie rod is supposed to be straight. It is bowed all the way around. See that bow? So what you do is you unpin it from that side, and then you come over here and you unpin it from this side, and you got to push down on the side and then lift it up and out sometimes, and vice versa. You throw it into a vise, you straighten it all out. If it is bent to the point that it has been weakened, you weld a piece of angle iron onto it with the angle pointing down. You want the triangle side pointing down. And the reason being is because if you put it with triangle side up, it'll hit on the frame right here. So just a piece of 1/2 inch angle iron will reinforce that. But at this point, let's talk about this deck. So what we're going to do is we're going to get this dropped off. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to roll this belt off of here, which is easy enough to do when that pulley thing is working correctly. It's not right now, so it's going to suck. So what's easier to do sometimes is to undo this pin here in the front. Let me come around. What's easier to do sometimes is to undo this pin in the front, then come back here and undo this pin and undo this pin and shift this whole side of the deck forward to be able to drop that belt off. Now, that's this side. On the other side, we've got a little hidden thing going on here. On the other side, we have this pulley piece up here. And I'm going to try and stick my finger through. Right here, there is a cotter pin. That cotter pin comes off so that this spring lifts up off of the top of this pulley. Then, on the back of your deck, you will have another cotter pin right here that you're going to have to pull out. There's going to be a little piece on the front, and then you're going to pull this out and set that whole cable out the rear end of the machine. Always do this first before you undo this cotter pin here. Because if you don't do it first, the whole deck comes down onto it and you can't get it to come loose. So always do that cotter pin the very last thing. At that point, this whole thing comes forward a little bit, and you can undo this cotter pin on this side, right here. Now, I bet you want to see me try and go and do it all on camera. Now, providing that nobody has decided to get in here and do any stupid ghetto stuff like cram a nail in one of these, all you should need is just a flathead screwdriver to remove this. You might happen to need a hammer to tap the side or something in order to get it to come loose, but they should pop off and then pry off. Now, this one you want to be careful because it's easy to have it come loose and smash across the back of the frame and slice the top of your hand off. Now, I'm going to see if I can get that belt to come off. And I got lucky. It came off. It was loose enough. But otherwise, I would have popped this off like I'm going to do now. And I would have just tipped the thing forward and it would have come off. Now, the thing about doing this is you can reach across and get to the cable nice and easy. Now, when you go to undo the cable, you're going to pull the big giant cotter pin out. The cable piece is going to come back, and then it's going to go towards this side through a slot in the metal bracket. After that, you pull the small cotter pin that's on top of the pulley. You lift up the spring. You set the whole thing out the rear of the machine. Now, we undo that, we undo the other side, and go from there. And guess what? Somebody did something dumb on the front. They put a couple of big giant... Okay, well, we're going to get these ones off. Then we're going to go and take a grinder to those ones. So, those are supposed to be just quick pull pins. Somebody decided to go and put the wrong thing in. Don't be a cheapskate. Don't bother trying to reuse these. Simply slice it with a grinder, punch them out, call it good, replace it with what's supposed to be there. Alright, let's see if we can do it using the prying technique. There it goes. Much easier. There we go. Now we'll do the other side. The prying technique. And we have the deck loose, and we can slide it out and take a look at it. There we go. So, hopefully you can hear me over my hot water tank homemade air compressor out back. So that belt goes like that, and goes like that, and goes there. So, your cable goes through here, the spring piece goes here, and this should go that way in order to engage. And as you can see, it won't do it. So underneath here, there's a pivot. So we're going to clean this all off, and we're going to take apart the pivot. And on a side note, that little washer there is way more important than you think it is, because it keeps your spring from going down on there. And if you forget it, before you know it, this will slice through your spring, and then you're out a $10 to $15 spring and $10 to $15 cable. And most likely your pulley will have burrs on it that slices belts. Set that aside. It is very important. That is something we were looking for. We'll get back to that later. Alright, let's see if we can get this to come alive on camera. So, there's a carriage bolt here with a 9/16 on it. And I'm going to undo it to the point that stuff should come loose. So this, when the cable pulls on it, goes this direction. So now that I broke everything free, like it ought to be, we should be able to watch this come back, like so, which hits the brake, which hits the brake, which undoes that, and everything spins. Then when you let off, this right here pulls here and brings it nicely back around and into position, which this one's not doing. Now, what happens is, underneath here, there are rollers that are on the end of these, and those can get jammed up, stuck, worn out. There's a roller here underneath this one that can get jammed up, stuck, worn out, and that pivot needs to be torn apart. So, we're going to pull this all the way off, and we're going to unstack this. So we've got nut, we've got the pulley there. You're going to sand that down nice and smooth. You're going to have a really big, thick washer that is going to be directional. See how it's got a directional side in it that goes down? And so what happens is, that right there, it's supposed to pivot around on, and as you can see, it gets filled with all kinds of rust, and it doesn't work anymore. So there's that. And then this piece here can then come out and up, like so. That washer comes off to get cleaned up. And last but not least, don't lose your carriage bolt. So we're going to sand and clean all of this up. Then we're going to get some anti-seize. We're going to lube everything in between. Put it all back together. Okay, so we got our can of anti-seize here. And we are going to liberally glob that on there. And take our washer. Stick our washer on there. liberally gob that. Okay. Now we need to take this, and remember that you check those rollers, make sure they actually roll, which they do. We're going to take this and we're going to bring it down so that this goes around that roller, like so. And then that bunts up against that roller, and then bring it around and line it up with our hole. So now we have this that yet again gets another liberal glob. And then we stuff it in there. And then it gets another liberal glob on top. And then we take this and we flip it up and we put it right there. And at this point, you should be able to put your carriage bolt up through everything. And put that down on. Now, to my knowledge, there is no torque spec on this. So what I have come to the conclusion of is that if you get it to the point that it tightens up definitely, and then come a couple of oogas off, it's usually about the right spot. So that's tightened up definitely, so I can't move it. And right in there is a little too loose. Way too loose. Things are better off done by hand. So we're going to loosen it up just a little bit and make sure that everything moves. There we go. That moves like that. Okay. Now, what I see is a lot of people all of a sudden think they're done, and the reason being is because of this rotted off spring that doesn't exist anymore when they go to take the deck apart. There we go. So what you do now is at Tractor Supply you have C239, it's a double pack, and you basically cut it in half and bend the ends out. And that gives you your homemade version of that. So you're going to have that piece right there. This is going to come all the way out here. And now, when you pull this, like so, it's going to pull back. After everything is all lubed up correctly, you've got your spring in place. This is how it should work. So from here to here, the cable pulls, and then you let go of the cable. There we go. Now we throw it back in underneath. So when you go to put it back in, you're going to lift it up. You're going to put in these. You're going to put in this back bar back here. And you're going to put your fronts in. Also, while you're here, don't be lazy about it. Get it done. Do your blades right now. Well, they're the easiest to get to they're ever going to be. On these Craftsmans, it's really easy to just grab a 9/16 and look at them right there. And most of the time, even a crummy little 200-pound Ooga Dooga will usually take off the Craftsman ones. If you're dealing with bigger MTDs, with the ginormous 24mm bolts for these, well, they're nuts actually. Those, on the other hand, those can take 1,000 pounds to take off at times. But these, just a quick Ooga Dooga, and you're back to cutting. Remember that steering bar that we talked about earlier? I figured I'd show you guys what I meant when I took it out. That's supposed to be straight. So from here to right here, you should be able to strike a straight line. So I'm going to throw that in the vise and beat it until it's relatively straight again. And then we'll get the deck thrown on. So I got the one in here, the one in there, and the one on the other side of that deck. And that one over there is way easier to do if you put the whole thing level on the ground and then attach it. In fact, all of this, putting it back on, is way easier if you drop the whole thing to the ground with the deck underneath it. Now, the reason why I have this up is for you guys on YouTube land. We're going to talk about this cable down here. So before we get underneath here, we've got our washer, we've got our small cotter pin, and we got our big rear cotter pin. So I'm going to try to do all this one-handed while holding this camera. We'll see how well that goes. So we've got our cable here, and our cable goes through the back, and I almost made a boo-boo. Remember that washer that I told you about? That washer goes right on top of here, and then our cable, or spring rather, goes on top of there. If I can get my stupid finger out of the way. There we go. So washer, spring, small cotter pin. Now it's funny because this is on the other side of the machine, but it's actually easier to do from this side. So now yet again, I'll try and do this one-handed. We're going to take the rear of this, and we're going to pull it enough that the cable goes through here, but this piece has to stay forward. So now we put that in there. We take this and we push this back. And then we have our really big, obnoxious cotter pin. And on one side, there is a hole that this goes in, and on the other side a groove that it clicks through. So we're going to see if we can find that one-handed here. There we go. Give it a shove. There it goes. Whoops, too far. Right there. So there we are. Our cable is now attached, and now we need to do this one. And we need to do this one, and yet again, it's a lot easier to do if the machine is all the way down on the ground and level. So we'll just set it down. Whoop, wrong button. Down we go. There we are. Here we go again. Okay, so uh-oh, I made a big, giant boo-boo. Can anybody tell me what big, giant boo-boo I just made? That bar is right there. Alright, so, rather than rip this whole thing apart, you can take this out, pull it out the other side, flip it around, and then put it on, which is what I'm going to do. But while we're here, we'll take this lifting bar and we'll bring that around, and we're going to have to lift this up a little bit and put it on there, but we'll be back. There we go. So we got the deck pan hard bar flipped around. That goes like that. We grab a cotter pin, throw the cotter pin in like that, and we've got that one in there. And at this point, all we got to do is get that put on there. There is a routing chart right here if you need it. And we'll see if this thing does something. Here's a side note tech tip for you while we're here dealing with this. If you want to drain the oil out of one of these and don't want it all over your frame, just take your average soda can or whatever beverage of choice, slice the ends off right there and right there, and then you can stick it up in there and it'll drain out into your Folgers can that fits behind your tire. That's just my tech tip I'm passing on for today. Well, there we go. Let's see if it'll actually engage now, shall we?